Hi, this is Kevin Trainer, and I'd like to welcome you to my lecture on Chapter 13 from the Schwalbe text, Project Stakeholder Management. And typically, I put this chapter out of numerical order because of a couple reasons. One, project stakeholder management is really primary to understanding project management. And the fact that it's at the end of this book is more an historical accident than anything else. Project stakeholder management was an important part of all of the knowledge areas until in I think 2010 or something like that, PMI decided to that it was important enough that it ought to get its own knowledge area. So they kind of took all the different parts that they had sprinkled throughout the previously 9 knowledge areas, and they created a 10th. And they put it at the back of their material, and Kathy Schwalbe put it at the back of her textbook, but that's kind of not the place. So we typically do it right after chapter 4, and I would assume that that's where we are in the course right now. So consistent with that is this kind of concept of this being a really important aspect of PM. So I see here on slide 2 that we did it in 2013, 2010, so even more recently. And the purpose of project stakeholder management is to identify all people or organizations affected by a project, to analyze stakeholder expectations, and to effectively engage stakeholders. So as we go through the rest of the chapter, we're going to be kind of going at each of those 3 parts, not particularly in order, but each of them. So one of the reasons why we really need to focus on the people who surround a project is the fact that they're affected by the project. And projects are usually associated with change. Now, this is really consistent with what we've said about projects so far. Remember that we said that projects were temporary, that we wanted to distinguish projects from continuing operations. And I kind of added in that often what projects represent is some kind of a change to continuing operations. It's either a new process, it's a new product, it's a new service, or we're decommissioning a product or service or process. It's change. And one of the things I like to say about change is that I like change as long as it's a change that I initiated. And I think I'm not alone in that. Okay, so people like change if they thought of it, and generally they don't like change if they didn't think of it, or if it doesn't get right at some immediate problem they have, and it represents a problem for them. Okay, so thorny situation associated with change. Project managers might be viewed as enemies if a project resulted in job losses for some of the stakeholders. Now, how are they stakeholders? Well, they're stakeholders because they're affected by the project. Okay, so they are stakeholders because they have some skin in the game. Okay, and if the change has some negative consequences, well, there could be some hard feelings. By contrast, PMs can be viewed as allies that they lead a project that helps increase profits, produce new jobs, or increase pay for certain stakeholders. In any case, PMs have to learn to identify, understand, and work with a variety of stakeholders. Changing the way that work is done, as I indicated earlier, can really be shocking. And some people can be left afraid. Some people can be thinking about ways to stop the project or sabotage the project because perhaps the continuation of the project is not in their interest. So Donald White, founder and program manager at Defense Systems Leaders in Washington, describes situations that can lead to project sabotage. And these are 4 scenarios: buy-in blues, short-term profits, overachieving, lack of respect. See, these are all situations where the project really hasn't been legitimized in the eyes of the stakeholders who are drawn towards a sabotage opportunity. Okay, so it's really important that we engage all of the stakeholders and we deal with them and their reality in order to, to fend off sabotage, among other things. Okay, in the beginning of these knowledge area sections, we often go through the processes involved in each of the knowledge areas. And this one is the same. We have the same kind of treatment. So the processes are identifying stakeholders, planning stakeholder management, managing stakeholder engagement, controlling stakeholder engagement. And here's how they fall into the 5 PM process groups. So in the initiating process group, we have identify stakeholders. In the planning, we've got planned stakeholder management. In the executing, we have managed stakeholder engagement. And in the monitoring and controlling, we have control stakeholder engagement. That's about where you thought that they were going to fall. And now we'll talk some more about them as we go through the chapter. So, identifying stakeholders. Well, where do we look? Well, here on slide 7, we're trying to distinguish between internal and external stakeholders. So, internal project stakeholders generally include the project sponsor, the project team, support staff, and internal customers of the project. Other internal stakeholders include top management of the organization, other functional managers in the organization, and other project managers because organizations have limited resources. So, again, stakeholders are people affected by the project either positively or negatively. So if you're going to take away the resources from some other team, they are in this wider sense a stakeholder of your project. External project stakeholders include the project's customers, if they're external to the organization, competitors, suppliers, and other external groups that are potentially involved in the project or affected by it, such as government officials and concerned citizens. So, it's kind of interesting here, but we're having, we're doing kind of inclusive thinking, right? And it's kind of funny because when I talk about stakeholders and when I hear other people talk about stakeholders, I have to listen to hear what context we're talking about. On one hand, people always include the group of people close to the project who are involved in the project, who support the project, and who fund the project. Okay, so that's the smallest kind of sense. Um, then we go out to the kind of sense that we have here, where we have people who are affected by the project either positively or negatively. Okay, and then you can almost get into kind of if a butterfly flaps its wings, right, kind of thing. So if a butterfly flaps its wings in Hong Kong, we may have a tornado in Tennessee. Well, I guess we might, okay? But some of that really wide-ranging hypothetical thinking is perhaps not so productive as thinking about the first two characterization of who stakeholders are. So I tend to think of this as the kind of exclusive expression of stakeholders, the close in, favorable, interested people, and then the kind of inclusive one that includes people who are not so close in and people who are not so interested or are not so much in favor of the project. You can kind of tell how people are using the term when you hear what they're saying. So in this third sense of if a butterfly flaps its wing in Hong Kong, that we may have a tornado in Tennessee, on this website, projectstakeholder.com, they list even more stakeholders: a program director, a project manager's family. So that's pretty wide, okay? Project manager's family are going to be affected by the project. Well, of course, everybody's family is going to be affected by the project, but does it help to have this influence our thinking? Well, in certain circumstances, it might. So some of these are getting a little too far away. Labor unions are certainly first-class stakeholders. Potential customers are as well. Okay, so we're looking for inclusive thinking, and we always want to be reminding you to not only think of those close-in, buddy-buddy favorite stakeholders, but think of this in a much wider sense of affected people who are going to be either going to have a positive or negative reaction to the project. And we're probably not going to worry so much about the butterflies nor the project manager's family. Okay, so what the first tool that we learn about here is just a record keeping and kind of analytical tool called a stakeholder register. It includes the basic information on the stakeholders. And before, well, let's just see, we've got categories here: identification information, assessment information, stakeholder classification. So what kind of identification information? Well, their name, their position, their location, their roles, their contact info, and then assessment information. Major requirements and expectation, potential influence, phases of the project in which they're going to have the most interest, and then classification. Are they internal or external to the organization? Are they a supporter of the project or resistant to it? Okay, and this is all pretty strong analytical thinking with regard to stakeholders. So here on slide 10, we see a sample stakeholder register for a project. So we've got the name, the position, internal or external classification, project role, contact information. So that's certainly the beginning of this kind of analysis. I just want to point out to people that in large-ish organizations, even in projects that don't take a long time, projects that take, say, a year, okay? And a project that takes a year in a large organization, this list will change over the course of the project as people come into the organization, people leave the organization, People have their responsibilities change. Okay, and so it's always interesting to take this kind of a document and look at it and say, is it up to date? Because there are times when you start to think, well, we haven't talked to Harry over in marketing, and you call Harry and find out that Harry got fired. There's a new VP of marketing, and that new VP is a major stakeholder of your project. So these things can change over time. So this is a document that you're going to want to maintain. Then we're going to want to classify the stakeholders in some way or other. Okay? Because what we'd like to do is we would like our classification using various schemes that we'll suggest in a minute. We'd like that to sort of inform the way we manage our relationships with the stakeholders. Okay, we want to get the most of the good, and we want to get the least of the bad, right? So some people classify stakeholders using a power interest grid. And they classify the stakeholders based upon their level of authority, which is their power, and their level of concern, their interest for project outcomes. So here on slide 12, we see the classic management consulting 4-quadrant grid, okay, in which we have we tried to come up with strategies for each of the 4 quadrants. So if their power is low and their interests are low, we just want to monitor them. Okay, so we just want to keep in touch. If their power is high and their interest is low, now we're saying that we want to just keep them satisfied. If their interest is high and the power is low, we want to make sure we keep them informed. And if their interest is high and their power is high, we want to manage them closely. Now this is pragmatic advice, right? So somebody kind of described this to me once, that we only have so much time and attention to go around, and we ought to start to distribute it at the top of the hierarchy. Well, that's maybe a cynical point of view and sometimes short-sighted, but it's pragmatic in the sense that this analysis is. We want to take the people who have the most clout in the organization, who have the highest investment in the project, and we want to make sure we put the greatest amount of time and attention into managing their expectations and trying to shape the project to meet those expectations. Stakeholders are not all engaged at the same level. Now here on slide 13 is a analysis of, well, it's sort of a scale of stakeholder engagement levels. So at the very lowest, stakeholders are unaware of the project. Then they move to potentially resistant. Then they move to neutral. Then they might move to supportive. Then they might move to leading. Okay? So here what we're trying to do is we're trying to capture really 2 variables. One is how much they know about the project, and the other one is how much they care and how favorable they feel. Maybe we're trying to capture 3 things. Okay, so looking at this kind of analytically, we're going to behave different towards people, depending upon how engaged they are or in what way they're engaged with the project. So we have an interesting story here, and we're going to use it to illustrate a point. So the point that we're trying to illustrate is, instead of just saying no when your project sponsor asks for something unreasonable, it's better to explain what's wrong with the request and present a realistic way to solve the problem at hand. For instance, Krista Ferguson, a PMP in San Francisco, described how she handled a request from a project sponsor to deliver a new tablet device in 2 months when she knew it would take more time. Based on her experience, she knew the RFQ, which we're going to learn when we get to procurement, is a request for a quote, for the effort alone would take almost a month. Krista quickly researched the facts to propose a realistic delivery schedule. The project sponsor reset expectations once he learned what it took to produce the tablets. So I think what I really like about this slide is it really emphasizes how important it is to manage the expectations of the stakeholders generally, and particularly the project sponsor, because this is the person funding the project. And there are times when managing those expectations is a little different than just telling them everything that they want to hear. There are times when their expectations are out of line with what can realistically be done. And so if there's anybody associated with the entire project who is worth the time to educate and to help to manage their expectation, it's the sponsor. And here's a story where this was done in a successful way. Okay, we finally got to the planning part, planning stakeholder management. In the PMI way, we have an integrated project plan that includes some parts from each of the knowledge areas. So then when we come to each of the knowledge areas, the question comes up, well then what's the plan going to be, right? What plan elements relate to project stakeholder management? And we're going to suggest it could include current and desired engagement levels for the stakeholders, interrelationships between and among the stakeholders, the communications requirements to and from the stakeholders, potential management strategies for each of the stakeholders, and methods for updating the project stakeholder management plan. Okay, now again, when new people come to this kind of PMI way, they're sometimes put off by the emphasis on planning. It's just like, oh man, this project plan is going to be 500 pages long. And I'm going to say that your plan overall, and your plan for each of the knowledge areas, should be as long and as formal and as much work as appropriate for the job at hand. Okay? And I'm also going to say that you and your organization probably have a way that you do these things. Okay? And so you're probably going to do the same kind of thing on this project as you've done in the past, and hopefully you already have a description of that. Okay? So the amount of new plan prose that you need to generate for each new project is probably not so high as you might imagine by initially looking at this slide. Now, this slide, the one that says sensitive information, has an interesting history. I've been using this text for a long time, so we're now on We're now on the 8th edition, and I think I started using the 5th edition. And we've had, each of them has had a revised edition. So I was on 5 revised, 6 revised, 7 revised, 8. I think I'm on my 7th version of this book. I was counting on my fingers in case you had not picked that up. And initially we didn't have this kind of caveat here. And so it looked like we were telling people to write down sort of maybe some pretty sensitive stuff about some pretty important people and put it into some kind of a planning document. Well, there was a lot of pushback. People said, well, I'm not sure we want to write that down. And so now we actively say, and we've said this for I think the past 4 versions of this book, look, some of this stuff, it's important to think about it. And it's important to express yourself, especially among the key players on the project. But maybe you don't want to write down all the details because you don't want it to fall into enemy hands. Or perhaps if you do, you ought to write it down and make sure it doesn't fall into enemy hands. Okay? Especially if you're identifying people who you believe are opposed to the project. And you're identifying some sort of a strategy for mitigating that impact. That certainly isn't a document you want to leave on the copier, right? So keep that in mind. So here's a sample stakeholder analysis on slide number 17. We have the name, we've ranked them on the power interest grid, we've ranked them on this current engagement scale, and then we're listing potential management strategies. So I guess we're saying this is a work in progress that we want to talk through amongst ourselves and then come to a conclusion. You'll notice that some of the comments over on the right side are maybe not things we would want to get out of our own hands. Okay? So how do we manage stakeholder engagement? Well, project success is often measured in terms of customer and sponsor satisfaction. Now, like, customers and sponsors are two very, very important subsets of the stakeholder group. And I'm going to say that if you come to the end of a project and you have some kind of technical success, like you've met the budget, you've met the schedule, you have some kind of argument that you were able to address the entire scope. If you get to that point, which a lot of people would say, well, I'm going to be able to declare victory there, and you have angry stakeholders, then I think you've gotten to a bad place, right? No matter what goes on, you ought to finish the project with stakeholders who are either happy, I mean, they love what's happened, or at a minimum, they feel like they've been treated professionally and fairly and been kept up to date. Perhaps everything didn't go their way, but they feel that they were dealt with in an appropriate way. So to have a kind of technical success on scope and time and cost, and then have a satisfaction failure is a failure. Okay? Keep that in mind. So how can we make sure that we're going to meet with their satisfaction in the end? One of the things that we could do at the beginning of the project is we could ask them to rank scope, time, and costs in order of importance, and provide some guidelines about how we're going to trade those off in order to meet the triple constraint. So we could ask for them for some thought thoughtful input in the beginning and then keep them up to date. The ranking could be shown in the expectations management matrix to help to clarify expectations. Now, I just want to point out that not all of the key stakeholders are going to rank those things in the same way. We live in a more diverse world than that. So here we have an expectations management matrix, and we have the measure of success, scope, time, cost, technology, and standards. And we're trying to rank these. And it looks like the person who filled this out ranked scope and time tied for first, okay, technology and standards second, and cost third. I just want to point out that if scope and time are tied for first, then technology and standards is third and cost is fourth. Okay, I'm not sure that they've they've ever tried to judge a race, but you can tie for a position, but then you don't award the next one. So you don't award second if you've tied for first. All right. Issue logs are very important things. I've always been amazed at how simple this idea is, how I didn't think of it myself. Okay, so I was part of a pretty well managed project back in the early 1980s, and somebody else was managing the project, and they had this issue log. And I said, "Oh, what's an issue log?" And they explained what this was. And I was like, "Oh, this is a very good idea." And I've never changed my mind. Okay. You use it as a way to document issues that arise on the project. Okay. So, one, you document them when they happen. Two, you can monitor and track them over time. You can make sure that we resolve the issues, or if they are unresolved, we know that they remain unresolved. Okay? So unresolved issues can be a major source of conflict and lead to bad feelings at the end of the project. Okay? One of the, so let's take a peek at one. Okay, so here's one. We have an issue number, a description, potential impact, date first reported, who reported it, assigned to, who's going to manage our reaction to this, the current priority, the due date, the status, comments. I tell you what's really interesting here. One is it allows you to continue to manage the issues before the project and make sure things don't fall through the cracks. You'd be surprised in a longer project, one that takes, say, well, at least a year, how often somebody comes up with an issue and you think about it and you say, you know, Bob, I think we addressed that already. And they go, no, we didn't. This is the first time. And you go back to the log, and lo and behold, 11 months ago, or 10 or 14 months ago, somebody raised the issue, and you can look across, and you can see how you resolved it. And perhaps you said, well, this seemed like it was going to be something, perhaps this was, should we increase the scope to include such and such? And we decided that we weren't going to do it because we consulted with a certain party and they said, nope, that's going to have to wait until the next project. Well, you can come back and you can say, we've already thought about this, and now you may want to go to our authority on whose decision we decided to close the issue. You may want to go to them and ask them to reopen it, but it's already been decided. you'd be surprised at the time you save by not going round and round about the same issue over and over again. And sometimes it doesn't take a long time before people forget because projects are busy, and your memory of the near past is good. Your memory of the longer past is less perfect. So I just think that issue logs are a very easy tool to use. And I've seen them used extremely well for the past 35 years. And I was impressed with them when I met them, and I'm still impressed with them. So let's try to identify some best practices of PMs in managing stakeholder expectations. Okay. Sometimes they simply can't meet all the requests from the important stakeholders. This is especially true if the important stakeholders have diverse and competing interests and requests. So suggestions for handling these include: be clear from the start, explain the consequences, have a contingency plan, avoid surprises, and take a stand. Okay? Those are all pretty well self-explanatory. But what I like about these is that they fit into a point of view which I support, which is we ought to have a continuing dialogue about the decisions that we're making on the project, and it ought to be well informed. Okay? And so be clear from the start. For instance, let's just not try to hoodwink people into agreeing to things that they're going to regret later. Make sure that people are making informed decisions. The same for explain the consequences. Have a contingency plan. We're going to have plenty of those because we're going to do risk management. Avoid surprises. Now, this is really two ways to do this. One is to make sure that people are giving informed consent as they go along, so they're not blindsided by things that is like, oh, when I agreed to that part of the plan, I never imagined that such and such would happen. Well, probably better to have explained that possibility back when everybody signed up for it. And take a stand. Don't, as the PM, your role is to be a facilitator, right? So you want to make sure that the project makes informed, well-reasoned choices, and doesn't just take the path of least resistance. Okay, and you, as the facilitator, your goal is to lead them to the promised land. You have to lead them to the success that they all want. That's not to say that there won't be hardship and sacrifice along the way. And so, your goal is to make sure that people are led through the process in an informed way, and they are content with the process when they get to the other end. Now, they might not have gotten everything that they want, and if this is a typical project, they haven't, but they know why they didn't, and they know they got some things and they didn't get other things. Okay, so this whole gestalt of facilitating a fair and thoughtful process along the way is really important to satisfied stakeholders in the end. Okay, you can, controlling stakeholder engagement, we're going to claim here, you can't control stakeholders, but you can control their level of engagement. Well, I wouldn't even go that far. I would say that you can influence their level of engagement. If you can't control people, you can't control their level of anything, but you can do things to influence that. So I'm gonna make a lesser claim and say that we can influence their level of engagement. Engagement involves a dialogue in which people seek understanding and solution to issues of mutual concern. We bring up the analogy of teaching. So it's important for teachers to engage with their students. So it's important to set the proper tone at the start of a class or a project. Okay? And that's all pretty consistent with the comments I made when we were visiting the last of our slides. So here's an example having to do with teachers that sort of illustrates engagement or non-engagement. If a teacher or manager does nothing but lecture on the first day of class or criticizes the person who offers a comment, students will quickly decide that their best strategy is to keep quiet. On the other hand, if the teacher uses a lot of activities to get all participants to speak, they will expect to be active participants in future classes. So, again, we're using this kind of teaching and teacher engagement metaphor as a way to kind of inspire this kind of leadership and facilitation and engagement that we would like to have amongst the project manager and the stakeholders. So here's some tips on how to keep engagement high. Key stakeholders should be invited to actively participate in a kickoff meeting rather than merely attending it. And this is, some PMs do this particularly well. You know, my wife is a very experienced project manager, and when she has these kickoff meetings, she definitely speaks, but she is in a lot of ways sort of the master of ceremonies. So she gets her stakeholders to tell the story of their point of view on the project by having prepared them ahead of time about the comments that they're going to make and sort of orchestrating the dialogue. And so the people who really have the power, you know, the sponsors and other key stakeholders that come to the meeting prepared to take responsibility for their sponsorship. And it's particularly effective. The project manager should emphasize a dialogue that's expected at the meeting, including text or whatever means of communication the stakeholders prefer. The project managers also meet with important stakeholders before the kickoff. And this is the thing. The kickoff is a lot of things, but it's very symbolic, right? So it's important that it go well. It's important that stakeholders, key stakeholders, especially the sponsor, take a lot of take a very active role in the meeting. And the only way that that's going to go well is if the PM has, I'm not going to say rehearsed them, but has really walked through what they intend to say and has really made suggestions so that the performance of the various key players converge in a way that gives you an optimal result. The project schedule should include activities and deliverables related to stakeholder engagement, such as surveys, reviews, demonstrations, and sign-offs. That kind of explains itself. What about if stakeholders are key project team members as well? Okay, so the early history of IT projects is that they lost track of their stakeholders and that they delivered products that the stakeholders were not happy with. And one of the things that we told them to do would be to keep the stakeholders engaged more directly the whole time. And so what a number of IT teams have done is to bring people from the business side onto the team. So Northwest Airlines, which is now part of Delta, was developing a reservation system called ResNet. It interviewed reservation agents for positions as programmers on the project team. Northwest made sure the user needs were understood by having them actually develop the system's user interface. So the more we can pull people into the team activity and integrate it, the better. Now, this is really a part of what, we've talked a bit about the agile approach to managing software development projects. And this is really what agile is trying to capture with the idea of having a product owner. Now, this is a person who really devotes quite a bit of time to the team. This is a person who understands the business and who's going to take responsibility for the product, really solving the needs, really addressing the needs of the business. So you're coming to the end of a chapter when you come to the slide for software, because it's always at the bitter end. So productivity software, communication software, collaboration tools can promote stakeholder engagement. So we didn't talk a lot about those things, but we're an information school, so we're not going to be surprised that typical information sharing behaviors are going to help this kind of process. Social media can help engage the stakeholders. For example, LinkedIn has thousands of groups for project management professionals. And I've been associated with or know about quite a few projects, big sort of academic research projects that, they have a Twitter account, they have an Instagram account, they probably have a Facebook page. They have a presence. And some PMs are using these things to encourage relationship building on projects, like giving recognition to the team. And giving recognition to the team is, I think, a really important thing to do. I know one project manager who really believes that whenever there's a big accomplishment on the project, there's a big install, that it's really important to find the most senior manager, classically the sponsor or the sponsor's boss, to write an email of thanks and congratulations to the project team. And she does this on a regular basis, and sometimes it's like pulling teeth because people are busy, they're doing other things, and they only want to write so many emails. But to see the smiles on the faces of the project team when they receive an an email from the division vice president or the the division president. It's really effective stuff. Social media, okay? So Elizabeth Herron has a book, Social Media for Project Managers, which sounds interesting. Not something that I've actually read, but certainly in favor of. Describes the pros and cons of several social media tools, including blogs, collaboration tools, IM, Twitter, Facebook, podcast, RSS, social networks, blah, blah, blah. She provides advice for when to use social media and when not to use it. As the saying goes, a fool with a tool is still just a fool. A lot of stakeholder engagement required old-fashioned techniques like talking to someone. And I think that's true. Now, again, here we are at an information school, and I would hope that we don't see social media as an end in itself, but rather, one of a number of tools that we have in our tool bag. So I think that our ideas about how to use those tools responsibly would be pretty well informed. And that is it for the prepared slides. So I just want to come back and I want to emphasize the importance of stakeholder satisfaction, right? A successful project always has happy stakeholders. They may not be ecstatic. They may not have gotten everything that they wanted. They may have had to trade off a number of things. It may have cost them more. It may have taken longer. They may not have gotten all the scope that they wanted to get. But if they come to the end of the project and feel that they know how they got there and that they were kept informed and they were consulted along the way, they're probably going to be sufficiently satisfied. And the opposite is, no matter how much stakeholders get, if they don't have that feeling that they were kept informed along the way and that they were listened to and that they were consulted, even if the decisions were not made in their way, no matter how good the cost, the time, and the scope could be, they're going to be unhappy. So happy stakeholders is a necessary condition for a successful project. It may not be sufficient. You may also have to deliver on some other things. But if you don't have stakeholders that have that good feeling at the end of the project, you got a mess on your hands. With that, I'm going to say bye until next time. Bye-bye.